What would you do if the only way to survive was to erase yourself? I was not always the person you think I am, the name you have spoken for decades, the one printed on wedding invitations, diplomas, bank papers, and gravestones I paid for. That name was born on a single night in 1952. Before that night, I carried another identity, one tied to truths so dangerous that keeping it meant losing everything. I was young, terrified, and holding a future that felt like thin glass in my shaking hands. I still remember the room. The light buzzed, the window was half open, and the air smelled like metal and rain. Someone asked me my name. Not who I was, but my name. It is strange how those two things can become enemies. My real name carried questions, records, and people who were suddenly very interested in finding me. The new name was clean, silent, invisible. When I spoke it for the first time, my voice cracked, as if my old life resisted leaving my mouth. Yet no lightning struck, no alarm sounded. Just a quiet scratch of a pen, and the person I had been ended. I wish I could tell you I felt powerful. I didn't. I felt like a thief, stealing my own shadow. To answer to a lie is harder than you think. For weeks, every time someone called me, I hesitated a fraction of a second. That hesitation was the funeral of my past. But with each repeated lie, the new name grew roots. It showed up on a train ticket, then on a work badge, then on a ring. Soon, even my reflection seemed to mouth it back to me obediently, as if my true self had gone underwater and learned to breathe differently. Why 1952? Why that year? Why that night? Those answers live in the space between documents that no longer exist, and people who stopped asking questions because it was safer not to know. Some helped me, some pretended not to see. Some would have destroyed me if they had learned the truth printed on my first birth certificate. You may think identity is permanent. It isn't. It can be traded, buried, rewritten in ink that everyone agrees not to read too closely. And yet, even after all these years, one sound can still split me in two, the sound of my real name, whispered in memory. It carries a story wrapped in fear, loyalty, and something darker that followed me across decades. I have lied with a steady hand, smiled with a borrowed face, and built a life over a secret foundation that was never meant to be inspected. Now that time is finally running out. The old name is knocking, again asking to be spoken aloud, asking to be believed one last time, before the truth I have carried since that year finally steps out of the shadows and into the light that I have avoided for so long. If you are still here, it means this story already touched something inside you, that quiet place where unanswered questions live. I want to know what you think so far. Leave a comment sharing what went through your mind while listening to this beginning, because your perspective truly matters for how this confession unfolds. Reading your comments helps me understand which parts resonate most and which secrets strike deepest. If this kind of truth-telling and hidden identity story is important to you, make sure to like this video. It shows that these long-kept confessions deserve to be heard. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of this revelation or the other stories that were never meant to become public. Every subscription tells me there is someone on the other side who wants to listen until the end. There is a moment when a life does not simply change, it fractures. For me, that moment was 1952. The newspapers from that year talk about elections, wars cooling and heating again, factories roaring back to life. None of them mention the small room where my past and future were fighting over my name. To understand why I had to disappear, you must imagine the feeling of being watched even in a crowded street, of hearing footsteps that may or may not be following you, of opening letters with hands that already know what they will say before the envelope tears. My real name had become a signal flare. Wherever it appeared, questions followed. It did not start with heroism or drama. It started with one decision, then a second, then an accident no one expected. I was not innocent, and I was not entirely guilty either. That is the worst position to occupy. Too involved to walk away, too human to forget. There were people using my real name in whispered conversations, attaching it to a file that should never have existed, connecting it with an event that had no clean ending. Someone disappeared, Someone else took the blame publicly, and the truth slid into the shadows where it sits more comfortably. I became part of that shadow whether I wanted to or not. The year 1952 became a wall. On one side there was who I had been, with a family that spoke my real name without fear, with friends who knew my laugh and not my secrets. On the other side was silence, invented papers, new signatures practiced until my hand believed them, officials who asked fewer questions than you would think, a man behind a desk who looked at me for 1 second too long, as if deciding whether I deserved to start over, then stamped a form that rewrote everything. That sound of rubber on paper is louder in my memory than gunfire or shouting. It was the sound of disappearance performed legally. The choice was simple and impossible at once. Keep my true name and lose my life as I knew it, or bury that name and watch everyone I loved believe in a stranger who looked exactly like me. People think disappearing means vanishing from maps. It doesn't. It means staying exactly where you are while erasing the trail that led you there. I walked in familiar streets under an unfamiliar identity, listening for danger wrapped inside ordinary greetings. Every introduction became a test. Every handshake was a risk. You may ask what secret could justify such. A lie stretched across decades. The kind that involves more than one person, more than one mistake, and more than one truth, twisted until it fit the official story. I carried information that was never meant to be spoken aloud, connected to names much more powerful than mine ever was. They needed me to be silent. I needed to stay alive. That uneasy agreement built the cage I walked into willingly. The bars were invisible, but they held all the same, guiding every step I took under the name you. Think belongs to me. And as the years passed, the question grew heavier than the danger itself. Was I protecting others, or only protecting myself from what my real name would force me to face? That question has never let me sleep easily, and it is why, even now, the story refuses to stay buried where we left it so long ago. Some lies are too large to carry alone. My new name did not survive those first months by my strength. It survived because certain people decided to look away at just the right moments. There was a clerk with tired eyes who slid a form across the counter and did not ask why my handwriting shook. There was a neighbor who noticed my story had seams that did not line up, but chose kindness over curiosity. And there was one person, closer to me than blood, who understood without words that the name I now used was a shield, and that asking questions could shatter more than a life. These people became silent pillars, holding up a truth that never reached daylight. Yet, for every accomplice by compassion or convenience, there were others who must never know. Children who learned to spell the name on my documents, spouses who spoke it softly in the dark, friends who engraved it into gifts and letters. They loved the version of me that the world recognized, unaware that this affection wrapped itself around an invention. I watched them build memories around a name that was never mine, and the warmth of those moments was always edged with cold fear. What would happen if they heard the other name, the forbidden one spoken aloud? There were also people who suspected more than they said. The man from my first job, who once paused after signing my paycheck as if comparing the ink to a rumor he had heard. The woman on a train who stared a second too long, as though she were searching for a face from an old newspaper clipping. No one confronted me openly, but I could feel questions hovering in the air, gathering like storm clouds that somehow never broke. Living under a false name teaches you to read expressions like secret messages, to measure every conversation for danger hidden between casual words. Not everyone who helped me meant well. Some enjoyed the power of knowing what others did not. A favor done quietly in exchange for future obedience, a signature provided with a nod that said, "You owe me." My new identity became a currency, traded in glances and hints, and I learned that silence can be bought as easily as paper. I told myself it was necessary that each compromise kept the past from erupting into the present, but the debt of those arrangements followed me into every room. And still, I protected the ones I loved by keeping them in the dark. They never asked why certain dates upset me, why certain names made my jaw tighten, why I avoided particular streets in old cities. They thought it was age or temperament or private grief. It was none of those things. It was the constant calculation of who could be trusted with even a fragment of what truly happened, and the knowledge that one wrong confession could unravel entire lives built on the name they believed was mine. There is a strange loneliness in being surrounded by people who think they know you. You laugh, you work, you celebrate, you mourn, but always with the awareness that they are embracing a version of reality you helped create. Some of them are still alive. Some of them died, never hearing my real name, never knowing why certain shadows followed our family across decades. Their absence weighs on me as heavily as the secret itself, because the truth belonged to them too, and I kept it locked away. At times, I wondered whether those who helped me lie were saving me, or simply protecting themselves from the consequences of the truth. That question has never truly been answered. All I know is that my identity became a collective performance, held together by the unspoken agreement that digging deeper was dangerous. And somewhere within that, silence, the line between who I was and who I pretended to be blurred, until even I struggled to remember which one came first. My real name did not become dangerous overnight. It gathered danger the way metal gathers rust, slowly, and then all at once. It was tied to a file that was supposed to be locked away, a mistake that powerful people preferred to call classified, and an incident that officially never happened. I was there when the story was rewritten, when reports were adjusted, when a line was drawn between what would be remembered and what would be erased. My name ended up on the wrong side of that line. After that, every record with my birth name was like a match waiting for a spark. It began with a request that sounded routine, a delivery, a message, a simple presence in the wrong room at the wrong hour. But I overheard what I was not meant to hear, saw signatures that should not have been together, and watched someone leave who was not supposed to be there at all. The next day, the official version appeared. Nothing unusual, no questions, everyone safe. Only it was not true. One person vanished from the narrative, as if they had never existed, and another person suddenly became important in ways that defied logic. My name was listed among those who had access. That was enough. From then on, I was no longer a citizen. I was a loose end. Men with calm voices asked me to clarify small details. Doors closed behind me more often than they opened. I learned the weight of silence, the meaning of phrases like "for your own good" and "national interest." It was not one crime, it was many threads woven into a pattern nobody dared to see whole. Money moved without explanation. A report was altered. A witness changed their story. And in the center of the web, my real name glowed like a warning light. I realized that names do not just identify people, they connect events that others are desperate to keep apart. The twist I didn't expect was this. I was not the only one threatened by that connection. Someone I loved would have been dragged into it simply for sharing my blood. That was when fear became decision. The false identity was not only an escape, it was a shield for them. Another turn came later, when I discovered that the dangerous people were not strangers in dark coats, but familiar faces at respectable tables, people who signed birthday cards with the same careful hands they used to sign orders that changed lives. I carried the knowledge of what really happened, like a locked box inside my chest. Sometimes I imagined opening it, letting the truth rush out and sweep away the lies that had settled like dust over decades. But every scenario ended the same way, with more lives broken than repaired. So the box stayed shut, and the new name stayed on my lips. Still, danger has a long memory, and even now I can feel it watching from across the years, waiting for one slip, one word, one moment where the old name escapes and calls everything back into motion. A false name does not sit quietly in your wallet. It breathes beside you. It follows you into every introduction, every signature, every moment when someone says your name with affection or anger or pride. For decades, I woke up each morning and put on my identity the way others put on a coat. It fit, mostly. But sometimes it pinched in invisible places. The borrowed name shaped my voice, guided my choices, even altered the way I remembered the past. Memory becomes slippery when it must constantly avoid certain rooms. The weight of the lie showed up in small rituals. I practiced my signature until it looked effortless, yet my hand always knew it was an imitation of a life that did not begin with it. On my wedding cake, the frosting spelled a name that did not belong to the boy my parents once held. When my children were born, hospital bracelets wrapped around their tiny wrists carried letters that erased an entire bloodline with a simple, administrative gesture. Those moments were beautiful and unbearable at once, joy braided together with a quiet sense of theft. Fear became my silent companion. Not terror, not panic, something steadier and colder. The fear that an envelope in the mail might hold the wrong name, that a distant relative might stumble across an old record, that someone at a reunion would say the syllables I had buried and watch my face too closely. I learned to laugh slightly louder at questions that wandered near the past, to redirect conversations with practiced ease, to keep photo albums selective. A life built on a mission requires constant maintenance. There were nights when the house slept, and I sat alone with documents spread before me, one name on paper, another echoing in my mind. That is when the real fracture shows itself, not in public, but in the quiet. Who was I without witnesses? Which name did my thoughts answer to? A borrowed identity keeps you forever slightly apart, as if you are watching your own life through a thin pane of glass. You touch everything, and yet a part of you remains untouchable, preserved under the name that no one is allowed to speak. Yet the lie also protected me, and that is the most complicated truth to admit. It opened doors that would have closed on my real name. It allowed me to work, to love, to build, to grow old. Gratitude and guilt lived side by side. Every success was shadowed by the thought that it belonged to a man who officially never existed before 1952. Every failure whispered the question of whether it was punishment for pretending. Identity is not only who we are, it is who we are permitted to be. Over the years, the new name didn't just cover the old one, it began to rewrite it. Friends told stories that anchored me to this invented history, and I nodded along, adding details that strengthened the illusion. The past I had lived became fragile, fading at the edges like a photograph left in the sun, while the life under the false name grew sharp and undeniable. That is the quiet danger of long lies. They stop feeling like lies. They become the furniture of your existence. Sometimes I wondered what would happen if, just once, I spoke my real name aloud in a crowded room. Would anything change? Would the walls tremble? Or would people simply blink, not understanding the significance, while the earthquake remained entirely inside me? These thoughts accompanied me through anniversaries, funerals, and celebrations. A second narrative running beneath the spoken one, never allowed to surface. No lie exists in isolation. Mine stretched outward like a shadow at dusk, touching people who never asked to be part of it. When I changed my name, I thought I was only altering my own path, cutting a single thread from the tapestry of my past. I did not realize how many other threads were tied to it. Over the years, I watched consequences appear in quiet, unsuspecting moments, as if the lie had a will of its own and liked to remind me it was still there. There were opportunities given to the man with my new name that would never have been offered to the person I once was. Others, who might have deserved them more, were passed over. My false identity opened one door and closed another, and people stepped into or out of those spaces without ever knowing why. A friendship ended because I could not answer a simple question about my childhood. A romance never began because I backed away from someone who was too curious about family history. The lie shaped not only my life, but the lives that brushed against mine and turned in new directions because of it. The deepest consequences lived inside my family. My children grew up believing in a story that began with a man who did not technically exist before 1952. They traced their roots along a line that bent away from the truth, proud of a surname that was never truly mine to give. I sometimes saw hints of the price they paid without knowing it. Confusion when paperwork did not align, frustration when certain records could not be found. a faint feeling that something in our history had been edited. They thought it was bureaucracy. It wasn't. It was me. There were others, too, who carried invisible scars from what I concealed. A person searching for a missing relative who did not realize they were standing right in front of them. Someone denied closure because the name they were looking for had been buried and replaced. Even strangers felt the ripple effects. A signature here, a testimony withheld there, a document altered slightly so my two lives would not collide. Every small adjustment protected me, but bent the path of someone else. The most painful twist came when I realized that my lie had become part of other people's truths. My spouse defended my history as if it were carved in stone, not knowing it was chalk that could be wiped away. Friends told stories that never happened, and I let them, because correcting them would have meant dismantling the world we had built together. There were moments when someone would thank me, praise me, or confess to me, speaking to a person who, legally and historically, did not exist. I answered anyway, and that knowledge sits heavy even now. I once believed I could contain the damage, keep it neat and controlled. Instead, it grew in directions I never anticipated, weaving itself into weddings, arguments, inheritances, reconciliations, and goodbyes. The lie did not just protect me. It rewrote destinies in small, almost invisible ways. That is what haunts me most, not the danger I escaped, but the truths I quietly redirected without anyone ever realizing they had changed course. When the clock begins to speak louder than your heartbeat, you stop pretending you have time. That is where I am now. The doctors talk in careful tones, but I do not need their words. I feel it in my bones, in the way memories arrive uninvited, in the way the past stands at the foot of my bed like an old acquaintance who has finally caught up. All my life I have answered to a name that is not mine. Now, at the edge of everything, the question is no longer whether I can keep the secret. It is whether I have the right to take it with me. There is something both terrifying and liberating about admitting, even silently, who I truly am. My real name tastes strange on my tongue, like a language I once spoke fluently and then abandoned. It carries faces, places, signatures, and moments that were erased from public record but never from my mind. I have written letters and torn them up, recorded tapes and destroyed them, always stopping just short of full confession. I told myself it was for their safety. Perhaps it was also because once the truth is spoken, it cannot be gathered back again. The twist that still startles even me is this: my real identity is not just a secret, it is a missing piece in other people's stories. Somewhere, there are unanswered questions that point directly to the person I used to be. A cold file, a confused relative, a rumor that never quite died. I have lived in the margins of those questions, listening to the world speculate about events I witnessed and choices I made while wearing the wrong name. To reveal myself now would change the shape of those histories, and I no longer know if that would heal or harm. Another truth presses in as the days narrow. The man I became under the borrowed name is not a lie in the simple sense. He loved sincerely. He worked honestly. He made mistakes of his own. Two lives have been braided together for so long that separating them feels like trying to unweave time itself. Yet there is still a boy with my real name standing in the past, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be forgiven for things that were never written down, but shaped everything after. So who am I really? I am both names and neither. I am the result of fear, loyalty, silence, and survival. And there is one final detail, one sentence that would reveal everything. The real name, the original identity, and why it vanished in 1952. I have held it back until now, balanced on the edge of speaking it aloud. Whether it should finally be said is the last decision left to me, and its consequences still ripple outward in ways I cannot fully predict. If you are still here with me, listening all the way to the last breath of this confession, thank you. It means you value hidden stories, unspoken truths, and the fragile weight of identities that were never allowed to exist in daylight. Your presence matters more than you think. If this journey through secrets, names, and long-kept truths resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story waiting in the shadows. And if you stayed until the end, let me know by commenting the words, "I heard your truth." I will recognize you there. Leave a like if this confession made you think differently about identity and the past we carry in silence. It truly helps these stories reach others who are searching for answers they can't quite name. Now, take a moment and watch the next video appearing on your screen. Another confession, another life lived behind closed doors, another truth finally stepping into the light.